John, you want to kick it off?
Sure. Looks like we're ready to get going. So firstly, and you know what, I'm gonna see if I can just address this now. So everybody should be able to unmute as we move forward. If you have any questions, we can definitely take them as they come. But I just wanted to thank everybody in attendance tonight for attending our public meeting on the development of our hazard mitigation plan, joined by members of the Hazard Mitigation Working Group, as well as Jamie Kaplan and her team. And we're pleased that you're here to learn about what we've done since our last update, and then also get your feedback on ways that we can become more resilient to natural hazards like flooding, severe winter storms, and extreme heat. As Jamie is going to explain in the presentation, this plan is critical to our community in a variety of ways, and the support of our community members and stakeholders, your questions, comments, and feedback is critical to the success of the process. So there's going to be a couple different ways that you're going to be able to participate tonight. We're going to be using an awesome system, Mentimeter, to get some community feedback that way. And of course, if you have questions, we're happy to talk as well. So to that point, I want to take this opportunity to introduce Kez, who's going to be providing English, Portuguese, and Spanish interpretation support tonight. And so in addition, Jamie, if you could go to the next slide. We have translated versions of the slides available on the city website. So if you navigate to those links there, framinghamma.gov/HMP1219, and it's PT for Portuguese, SP for Spanish. So that's available there, and there's more information on our hazard mitigation landing page as well. I will put that link in the chat for everybody, as well as these links to the different slides. So with that, if anyone has any questions or comments as we move forward, please raise your virtual Zoom hand, and I'll turn it over to Jamie to get things started. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Thank you so much, Sean. I appreciate it. So to start, what I wanted to do was show you this slide. If you could open a browser window on your computer or on your phone, however you've joined us, and go to this website, menti.com. And you don't need to download any software, just go to the site and you should be able to put in this code 54082566. And the code will be on all the slides. So if it takes you a minute to get there and we turn away from this slide, don't panic. But you can go ahead and hit that heart button if you made it, and then we'll have some sense of if we've got a few people there. There we go. And if you didn't get there, don't worry about it. Not a big deal. Great. Okay, so as Sean mentioned, if you've got a question, you can either unmute yourself or raise your hand on Zoom. Sean's going to help me sort of moderate all of this, so we'll be able to get you involved. And we definitely want you to be involved today, so please don't hesitate if you've got questions. There'll be time to ask them during the presentation as well as at the end. All right, so just to test out the Mentimeter and how it's working, go ahead and answer this question and we'll get a sense of if it's working for people. I guess if this was a meeting with lots of children, we might have the gifts one popping up pretty quickly. All right, so now at least you have a sense of how it's going to work when I ask a question, and you'll be able to participate in this way. Good. Perfect.
Jamie, could you, just for people that join a little late, can you provide the link to that so we can post it in the chat?
Provide the link to the
Mentimeter. I see that at the top.
Yeah,
see that
you
at the
just
top.
go to the menti.com and put in this code.
Awesome.
Yep. All right. So let me give you a sense of who I am and what we do and what your hazard mitigation plan is all about. So my name is Jamie Kaplan, and the Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency hired my firm to develop 14 plans, hazard mitigation plans throughout the state. And I put together a team. Their pictures are below. We've got Darren Punchard, Bill Bond, and David Murphy. There's some other folks on our team, but we're sort of the leadership, if you will. And we have been working across the state, as well as we collaborate on other projects as well to develop this hazard mitigation plan. I've been working in the field of emergency management and specifically with mitigation planning since about 2002, but been in the field of emergency management longer than that, have written a number of plans in Massachusetts, but we also work nationwide. So written several plans for American Samoa, for the city and county of Maui. We work with Indian tribes. We're updating a plan for 15 communities, including New Haven and South Central Connecticut at the moment. We work in Vermont, and we do some work to support FEMA. So we've got a lot of good information as a team and a lot of good experience, I should say, but we don't know a lot about Framingham. None of us live there, although Darren was born there. And our expertise enables us to write these plans because we know the questions to ask the community, how to involve the right group of people, and what the plan needs to show. And part of the involvement is to have public meetings like this. So hazard mitigation, I want to make sure that when you leave here today, you have got a good sense of what in the world it is and what it's not. So hazard mitigation would be any sustained action that you take to reduce or eliminate risk to people and property. And for our purposes, we're going to talk only about natural hazards and the effects of natural hazards. And when you spend money to mitigate risk, you are in fact saving money, approximately $6 saved for every dollar you spent mitigating. So for instance, if you fix a culvert so a road doesn't flood, as opposed to waiting for that road to flood and businesses to shut down and possibly people being injured and out of work and what have you, it's much more expensive to wait. So that's why we want you to mitigate risk. So emergency management, this is kind of an aerial view, if you will, includes these four main buckets. Preparedness is easy to understand if you think about, if we thought at the end of this week we're going to have a large snowstorm, everybody rushes out and buys milk and eggs and bread and what have you. They're preparing. The storm is imminent, so they're getting ready to deal with it. Response tends to be first responders, and it's quite simply what you do when the emergency is here. The disaster has occurred, the hazard is here. Recovery, very simply putting the pieces back together. Mitigation is what we can do so we don't have a disaster. What do you do on a nice sunny day, knowing you could have extreme cold at the end of this week, which we will, or we could have an ice storm or something like that? What can you do now so that hazard, whether it's the extreme temperature or the cold, doesn't become a disaster? We can't stop the hazard, right? So we can't change the temperature, although we could get into global warming, I suppose. But we definitely don't have to have disasters, and that's where hazard mitigation comes into play. And there are some benefits to having a hazard mitigation plan as well as doing the mitigation planning itself. So the plan identifies cost-effective actions to reduce risk. So I like to say we're not coming up with harebrained ideas. These are really thought out ideas on how the city can reduce their risks to the natural hazards we identify. We look to how we can use your resources on your greatest vulnerabilities. We consider putting together partnerships, and many of you have participated in some of the meetings we've hosted. The plan itself, as well as the planning process, does increase awareness of hazards and risk, which I personally think is one of the greatest benefits. I think if you know what can possibly happen, you're certainly more likely to do something about it. The plan will communicate the priorities of the city, not just the priorities to mitigate risk, but other priorities such as equity, other priorities that are in your other plans throughout the city are included in the hazard mitigation plan. So we review all of the plans, the bylaws, zoning, all the information that makes up Framingham. We look at that and we want to make sure that the mitigation plan we develop reflects those priorities and aligns with your objectives. And finally, implementing the plan will hopefully save lives and definitely save money as well. So when we put your plan together, we first looked back to the plan from 2017. Then we also look to the state hazard mitigation plan from 2018. Darren Punchard, who's on our team, he and I had lead roles in developing that state plan. So we're very familiar with it. And we look to your municipal vulnerability preparedness program plan, which is focuses on climate adaptation. And we want to it's a requirement, of FEMA that your plan be consistent with the state plan. But again, like I mentioned previously, we want to look to what you've done in the past, what your priorities are. So we're reviewing all of your other plans with a big focus on the previous mitigation plan and what we call your MVP. So we began the planning process back in February. It's typical for it to take about a year or so. We put together what we call a hazard mitigation planning committee. For you guys, you call it your working group. That committee met 4 times. We've also had 2 public meetings, with this being the 2nd meeting. So the task 1, that convening the local HMPC, if you will, really what that is public engagement and public involvement. And as you can see, it spans the length of the project because, as I mentioned to you previously, it's really one of the most important parts, that you be actively engaged in this project and that your interests and your expertise is reflected in the plan. Updating hazard profiles, the critical facility inventory, all of that has to do with analyzing risk. And that's where we start in developing your plan. And then the mitigation actions, those are going to be the projects that are included. It's the what you're going to do about it, if you will. It's how you're going to handle the fact that winter storms are coming, flooding is possible. What can you do so that those things don't become disasters? That's what's going to be in the mitigation actions. And we like to spend as much of our planning process on developing those actions, because that is the most important piece of the plan. This is what you're left with at the end of the day, and what we hope you'll implement. And I should say that Sean has been incredibly involved, almost more than any community I've worked with. I mean, really gone above and beyond to work with us to put together a fantastic list of actions. And we'll get into those in some detail, but you're lucky to have him. And I think that the actions that are there really reflect some legitimate projects that you can get funding for and that will make a difference in Framingham. the plan will include sort of this final chapters of how you're going to review the plan when you update it again and how you're going to implement it. And finally, there's going to be time for all of you to review the draft plan. So that gives you some sense of our timing. The Hazard Mitigation Committee, or working group, as we call it, was one of the first things that we put together when we started working with Framingham. And the role that the committee plays is to provide us with supporting data and information. Now, that could be real specifics, geographic information systems data, if you will. It can be numbers of homes that were built in the last 5 years, any kind of information. Then the committee worked with Sean and I to identify the status of the previous list of hazard mitigation actions, as well as identifying a new list of actions. The committee is in the process of reviewing and commenting on the draft plan. And then prior to us sending the plan to the state, that's MEMA, the Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency, for their review, Sean and the committee give the go-ahead for us to move the plan to the state. So you all know the plan will go to the state for their review. And then from there, the plan goes to FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, for their review. FEMA approval of the plan is necessary for the city to be eligible for what we call pre-disaster mitigation funding. And there's a tremendous amount of money available now. So that is one of the biggest motivators for cities and towns and states throughout the country to have hazard mitigation plans in place, because then you're eligible to receive these pre-disaster dollars. And as I mentioned, you'll have 2 public meetings, this being the second one, and then an opportunity to review the draft plan. And the website that's listed in the chat is where you can find the data from the previous public meeting. And when the plan is ready for the public to review it, there'll be a link there for you to review it as well. All right, so let me get into some of the specifics. The risk assessment process, this is where we're trying to identify your risk. First, we consider natural hazards, and that will include making really a laundry list, if you will, of all the possible hazards that can occur. And we look to each hazard to understand historically what's happened, where does it occur, what's the extent of it, and the future probability. So we're going to look backwards as well as forwards when we're putting this information together. Then we want to take a look at your critical facilities, and the city decides what facilities are considered critical. They tend to be assets of the built environment. So we're thinking about your city hall, your fire station, it could be a hospital. And we make a good list of those, and we want to look to what's essential for life and as well as economic viability to the city, because ultimately what we're trying to do is protect those facilities. We put those two together and come up with what we call risk. And for this purpose, it would be the potential for damage or loss created by this interaction of the natural hazards and the critical facilities. So before I get into too much detail about the risk and what we've found, you can go ahead and type in up to 4 natural hazards that you think can impact the city of Framingham. And there's really no right or wrong answers here. So go ahead and, pardon me, if somebody puts it, if you want to also write in flooding, that's fine, because it'll make this word cloud and we'll see the priorities get to be the biggest. Good. Earthquake, cold, heat, winter storms, hurricanes. This is a good list. High winds. I like it. Flooding is huge because that is a huge issue. Blizzards. Yep. Or nor'easters. Good. Who else? Anybody else have other ideas? Good. I know it's silly, but I think these word clouds are kind of cool. Arctic temperatures. Yeah, we're supposed to have Arctic temperatures the end of this week. Good. All right, so we did something similar. And when we identified your hazards, what we did is consider them in terms of their climate change interaction. And this is how the state hazard mitigation plan looks at hazards. So we want to be consistent with that plan. I also think it makes sense. Obviously, climate adaptation is something that is a priority in the city. So all of the hazards that are there in black were hazards that were in your previous plan. We added to this plan invasive species and infectious disease. And I think you don't have to go too far in Massachusetts to realize that invasive species do in fact exist, whether we're talking about different tree diseases or diseases that you see in ponds and what have you, to tick-borne issues. There's plenty of them. And then infectious disease, that can be COVID as well as other diseases. So that's the list that we came up with, and you guys came up with the majority of them. It's important for the hazard mitigation plan that we list absolutely everything. But then when we talk about your mitigation actions, we really focus on the hazards that are going to be your greatest challenge. So as I mentioned to you before, we had that when we come up with risk, we're looking at the hazards as well as the critical facilities, and that can be buildings and infrastructure. So help me, what do you think are some of these buildings or infrastructure that we want to make sure the city protects? And I think you can write in about 3 of them. I think I set that up. Got to protect something. City Hall, good. Metro West. Transportation, EOC, that's the Emergency Operations Center. Public safety buildings, pumping stations, stores, good. Schools and hospitals, I like it. Fire stations, pumping stations, senior centers is a good one. Nursing homes. Great. And you can see as you all start to make this list, you're beginning to think not just about these buildings and infrastructure, but you're by what you're posting in here, you're thinking about your vulnerable populations, right? You're thinking about kids at school, you're thinking about people at senior centers or hospitals, nursing homes. That's great. Electric lines, resource center. Good. Okay. So our list includes all of those things plus several others, although I will say we don't really have stores in general included because we're looking at facilities that the city can specifically mitigate risk to for the most part. Anyway, we've got the Memorial Building / City Hall, public libraries. Libraries, besides being public buildings, are frequently used as heating or cooling centers. The State Police Headquarters, Metro West Medical Center, MEMA Headquarters, Police and Fire and Public Works, and we've got a list of several other places and some infrastructure like the water and sewer infrastructure and the pumping stations.
And Jamie, just to highlight too, I would say, yeah, this definitely isn't like exhaustive of everything that's on there.
Oh, no. Yeah.
This is just a selection from that list.
Yeah, this is just a snapshot. We're giving you a flavor of the mitigation plan. So when we look to analyze risk, we're looking at all of the hazards, as I mentioned before, and we think of them in terms of their probability, the impact, the spatial extent. And what that means is something like extreme cold is really what could be considered an atmospheric hazard, right? It's going to impact the whole community pretty much equally, whereas flooding is probably more specific to, shoreline, whether it's a river or, a dam breach or something like that. Warning time, how much time you have to prepare for something, definitely plays into its level of impact. The duration, how long will something exist? And then we come up with this value and ranking. And it's not an exact science, but I think we could probably all agree that flooding, severe winter storms, and extreme temperatures are priorities as well as large issues in Framingham. So it makes sense to put your attention there. And that's the purpose of ranking the hazards, is just to kind of guide our focus. It doesn't mean that things that are low won't be attended to or won't be considered. The other thing we do with the critical facilities is we map them in with the hazards to the extent that we can. And I know this is kind of small on your screen, but it'll be in the plan. All the maps will also get shared with the city so that you can use them. And it's a way to graphically see, okay, here's where the floods can happen. Here's where our critical facilities are. And when they overlap, we want to focus on how we can mitigate that risk and make a change. So as we think about mitigating risk, and again, this is the most important piece of the plan, and the previous public meeting that we had focused a little bit more on the hazards and on the critical facilities, whereas this meeting I wanted to focus a little bit more on the mitigation actions as well as how you can review the plan. So when we look to mitigation actions, we're thinking about mitigating the hazard impacts to what exists today in the city, as well as what's going to exist in the future. So we want to know, how is Framingham developing? And we want to make sure that we have mitigation actions in place that help you develop in a way that does not increase your risk. So thinking about, for instance, this map that I showed you where we're mapping flood areas, we would want to make sure that you don't build in high hazard areas, or if you do, that you're building responsibly in those areas. So again, we try and look to what exists now, as well as what's going to exist in the future. And I should add in here to the people, right? We want to always focus on the people. So who's going to live in Framingham? Where are they going to live? What are their needs? You guys really were good at pointing out you have some vulnerable populations, right? And you want to make sure that as you develop the city, it's in a way that's feasible for folks to live well. We want to make sure that you're building where there's transportation areas and etc. So all of that plays into coming up with some mitigation actions. So your plan has one overarching goal. This may be changed slightly, but not much. We're tossing around the idea of how do we include equity, and is it necessary to really name it? But it is such a priority of the cities. So, the goal is to reduce the loss of life, property, infrastructure, and cultural and historic resources. We always start with life, from natural disasters and climate change. And really, this should probably say natural hazards, through a hazard mitigation program that includes infrastructure improvements, capacity building, natural resources protection, and education. So I know that's absolutely a mouthful, but we tried to break it down with 4 objectives that kind of just define those 4 key areas a little bit more. So Infrastructure, this is your critical facilities and your expanded infrastructure. When we talk about capacity, we want to expand the city's capacity to mitigate risk and not develop in a way that would be increasing your risk. And so that capacity increases through regulations, through planning, through regional collaboration, and that there needs to be a culture of mitigation. So I really encourage every community that we work with, when you do any kind of planning in your city, whether it is a special event or a study, whatever it is, you want to consider mitigation. You want to consider what your hazards are, and you don't want to increase them. You want to always mitigate that risk. Natural resources are a priority for you as well as the state. That's part of why you participated in that municipal vulnerability preparedness program. So we want to make sure that you are implementing actions that will reduce risk from climate change and protect the natural environment. And finally, education. We talk about educating all stakeholders. So that could be education within the city government, as well as education for the public and other folks who live and work in the city. So those are sort of the guiding principles, if you will, for the plan itself. And when we look to developing the very specific mitigation actions fall into one of four categories. One of these four categories, excuse me. So local plans and regulations. This has to do with not developing in a hazardous way, if you will. So for instance, land use ordinances, enforcing building codes, preserving open space. These projects tend to be, kind of middle of the road in terms of budget, but they take a lot of public and political will. Then structure and infrastructure projects tend to be big budget and tend to be what you would think of first when you're looking at how to mitigate risk. So this could be raising buildings above flood-prone areas, undergrounding utilities, which is something that everybody always wants to do, and most people put it into their bylaws and land use ordinances that new developments underground utilities, but it's pretty prohibitive to just go through a city and take everything that's above ground and put it underground. That doesn't happen very much. Building flood walls or retaining walls, detention structures, and culverts. And then natural systems protection. This would be your sediment and erosion control, managing the forest, preserving wetlands. And we want to talk about things like wetland preservation because those wetlands hold water. And when we get rid of them or don't take care of them, that water seeps into areas where we're trying to live and work. So it's really a priority. And then the education and awareness programs, these are always my favorite. I think they're your biggest bang for your buck. And like I said to you before, I think if you have a well-informed population, then your risk will go down. And there's really a limitless number of ways to educate the community. So I ask you, what we asked ourselves is how can you mitigate risks to these hazards we've previously identified? So think of the list of critical facilities, think about the people we want to protect, and the infrastructure that we previously named, and what could we do? What can the city do? The hazards are inevitable, but the disasters don't have to be. So what do you want to do about it? And take your time, please. It's not an easy question. Provide information to the community. Good. Zoning regulations to protect the wetlands. That's perfect. Reduce heat islands. Good, and so important, especially in cities. Preserve wetlands, purchase of open space and protect land, designed all new buildings to meet a higher standard for flood and stormwater. Planting trees is perfect. These are good. Anybody have anything else? Inspect trees to remove diseased ones. Yes. It's so sad to see that happening. Encourage green energy use. Good. Energy resiliency of buildings. That is a good one. You guys have some good ideas. We're on the right track here. Design infrastructure with consideration of natural resources. Terrific. Alternative power sources in the event of electricity outages. That is a great one. And I can tell you that, I've been doing this work for well over 20 years. And we used to just talk about generators. And now we really are talking about, what about a microgrid? What about solar with backup batteries? And, people are expanding their focus, and that's good to see. All right, so let me give you a sense of some of the things that we have. So your plan has approximately 43 mitigation actions. They shifted around a little, so I may be off one or two. There are 12 actions specific to local plans and regulations. So again, that's a great way to not build, not develop in a hazardous way. There are 6 actions specific to natural resource protection, 12 outreach and education actions, and 13 structure and infrastructure projects. So it's a really good balance, I think. You've got 17 high priority actions, and then 15 medium, 11 low. Prioritizing the list of mitigation actions is something that FEMA requires. We do sort of a benefit cost analysis, if you will. I don't in this presentation get into a lot of the detail of how we prioritize the actions. But the benefit of prioritizing the actions is if you have money, it gives you a sense of how to spend it. But, and this is a big but, in fact, you're most likely to implement your actions in the order that you get the money. And you'll get the money when people in the city have the impetus to apply for grants. So if somebody is gung-ho about a low priority project and applies for funding and gets it, one of those projects might be implemented before a high priority project. So, it's not an exact science, but it does kind of give you a sense where to put your energies. 18 of the actions directly protect your critical facilities. And then the actions are divided among these leading departments in the city. So you can see it's not something that falls just to emergency management, even though we're talking about hazards. We're really looking for the entire city, all of the departments to get involved in mitigating risk. And so these departments at the moment are the ones that are have the majority of the projects.
Yeah, just to add to that, Jamie, similar to the amount of critical facilities that we have listed, another important thing to consider is that even outside of these departments, there's a number of local organizations and agencies that are listed as part of our actions, really key supporting members. And so there's even departments that are not listed here that will play a big role in a lot of these different actions.
That is a really good point. Thank you for mentioning that, Sean. And all of the work that we've done has included like these nonprofit organizations and regional organizations. We've tried to really look beyond just local government. And in the plan, each of the mitigation actions will be assigned to a city department But as Sean just mentioned, many of the actions involve multiple stakeholders, and that could be nonprofit organizations or regional organizations. So again, this is your list of responsible departments. And then this is just an example of some of the high priority actions. So again, there's 43 actions. Each of the actions that we've included in your plan gives fleshes out some detail about them. It doesn't give you enough to apply for grant funding. You know, you're still going to have to write a grant application, but we explain what the action is and what's the benefit of it. We include who's engaged or who's most responsible for implementing the action. We've put in there the estimated cost, a potential funding source or two of where you can do it, and the timeline for when the city intends to implement the action and sort of how long that will take. So we include what I like to call essential details. So there's some more information. So just to give you a sense, retrofit or update or replace undersized and unsafe culverts. These are those areas to the edge of the road where water needs to flow. And if the water can't flow, then the road floods over right away. And that means they can't get blocked with debris and they need to be large enough for water to flow. Completing the rehab of the Worcester Road sewer pump station. Integrating relevant hazard mitigation plan priorities and actions into the city's forthcoming climate action plan. So again, that's a way to include this culture of mitigation and bring this forward. Protect and restore wetland areas and water bodies. Develop green infrastructure on municipal properties to improve stormwater management and reduce heat island impacts. Some of what that's alluding to or talking about is every time we pour cement and you know, build something, we're not letting water get back into the ground. And what this is talking about is let's make sure that we can allow water to get back into the ground, and that we're not just having more and more cement, which raises the heat. And evaluate and pursue opportunities to use clean energy technologies such as microgrids to provide enhanced backup power to municipal facilities. This is a terrific list. And again, this is just the sample. And my purpose today is to really just give you a sense of what you're going to find in the mitigation plan and then encourage you to take a look at it. So integrating the hazard mitigation plan is a priority of the plan. And I think as we've talked through this, you see that there are some ways to integrate the plan. Certainly land use planning, protecting critical facilities, natural resource protection. But as you do any kind of planning or development in these areas, bring in the mitigation plan. And even if you don't work for the city, you can bring mitigation planning into whatever activities you're doing in your, in your job or at your home. So thinking a little bit about your home or your business, what are some things that you think that you could do towards mitigating risk, or what can people do towards mitigating risk at their own homes or businesses? You don't have to be a homeowner. You can be a renter. Doesn't matter. What are some things we can do to mitigate risk? Let me give you some hints. Remember, oh, here we go. Create an emergency kit. I like it. Maintain as much natural environment as possible. Absolutely. Ensure perimeter drains are clear of debris to avoid flooding. Flood drainage systems. Right. You want to move water away from your house. Develop large-scale microgrid with solar and battery backup power. That is awesome. Wouldn't it be nice if neighborhoods had microgrids? Can you imagine? Be pretty cool. Get anybody else with some ideas? When I limit new construction in basements that are in the floodplain, yeah. Check health of large trees, that is very good. I second the microgrid suggestion. I want to third it. I think it's cool. It's a great idea. Clear debris around your property. We talk a lot about that when I do work in California just because of the wildfires. Limit chemicals on your property. That's a good one. And don't just dispose of things into the drains, please. Community group to help with emergency preparedness. Good. Pretty cool. All right. So let me give you a sense of what you're going to see in the plan. The plan will be, or is, I should say, several hundred pages. The introduction focuses on changes that have taken place since 2017 when the previous plan was written. I should back up and tell you a lot of what's in the plan is a FEMA requirement. So the plan does need to get reviewed and approved by FEMA, and there are very specific things that FEMA is looking for. And so we write the plan to meet those needs as well as to meet the needs of the city. The planning area profile, that chapter 2, really sets the stage for what is Framingham, what's there, who's there, what does it look like. The planning process is a FEMA requirement that we describe. How did we develop this plan? Who was involved in it? And what are some of the studies that we looked at and reviewed? The risk assessment is probably the longest chapter in the plan. It will describe each of those hazards that I mentioned to you previously, list all of your critical facilities, and then summarize that risk and vulnerability. The capability assessment at chapter 5, we didn't talk about much today, but what it does is describe the city's capacity to mitigate risk in 4 key areas. Plans that you have in place, administration and technical capacity, your finances, and what education and outreach you're already doing. And then it also looks to your participation in the National Flood Insurance Program. We take the information from chapter 4 and chapter 5 to help come up with those mitigation actions, because each of those chapters identifies areas of challenge. Then chapter 6 outlines your goals and objectives and then gets into the details of the mitigation actions. Chapter 7 is where we've got the plan implementation chapter. So you just see how the city's going to implement this plan and maintain it. So I encourage you to take a look at the plan. It is not ready for you to take a look at yet. So as soon as it is, which will be early in January, right now the committee is reviewing the plan. We'll make some changes to it and then get it ready for public consumption. You'll have 2 weeks at a minimum to review the plan. We'll put out a press release and flyers and other things. So the same way that you found out about this meeting is how you'll find out that the plan is available. And we'll make sure that with that, we're clear how you can provide feedback on the plan. Something key to know about the mitigation plan is we're working towards having it completed. So FEMA, it goes to the state and then again goes to FEMA for their approval. Then it'll go back to the city for adoption. But the plan is a living document. So it is approved by FEMA for 5 years, but the city can make any change anytime within that 5 years, and it doesn't go back to FEMA for more approval until the 5 years are up. So we try not to stay in this planning process well beyond a year because it doesn't really serve you. We want to have the best plan we can and move it forward so you are ready to apply for grant funding, and then you can continue to update it. One thing that you'll see in chapter 7 is that we request or suggest that you have a committee meeting and review the plan following any decent sized disaster. right? So if for some reason there is a disaster, that's a really good time to pull out the plan and say, are our priorities still the same? Do we have the right list of mitigation actions in here, or do we want to make some changes? And sometimes you'll see that having a disaster can change focus on priorities. So that's a good time to look at it. All right, as we move towards ending, I know I talked at you a tremendous amount, but I want to open it up and let you type in any questions, and then people can unmute themselves and ask questions. And hopefully between Sean and I, we can answer them. Does anybody have a question? And if you feel more comfortable to unmute yourself as opposed to type it in, that's fine too, whatever works for you. Anybody? All right, well, let me show you. This is our contact information. So if you do have comments or questions that you wanted to, you're welcome to reach out to me directly, or obviously Sean is the sustainability coordinator and has been the lead on behalf of the city for this project. So you can reach out to him as well. This presentation, as well as the versions in Spanish and Portuguese, are on the website. So, you can always refer to them, and we're recording this, so that'll end up on the website as well. Let me back up and see if anybody has any questions. All right, well, if nobody has any questions, we'll wrap it up, but hopefully this gave you a decent sense of what is in the plan. It's a large document. There's a lot of detail in there. Some of it's fairly technical, but I really did just want you to have a good understanding of it and know where to look for different pieces when you do go ahead to review the plan. Sean, do you want to add anything else?
No, just I want to thank the hazard mitigation working group again, all the city departments. We've had countless meetings to review different actions and just tweak things, make sure we have all the right information. Really credit to them for this plan, and of course Jamie and her team for their support and really putting this together. So thank you everyone who can make it tonight. Really appreciate it, and we look forward to getting you a draft of the plan so you can review, and we look forward to feedback, questions, comments, because all of that's important in shaping this into something that's going to be most helpful for the community. So thank you, everyone. And with that, Jamie, unless there's anything else, think that's it.
I think that's it too.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you all. I appreciate your coming, and I hope it was informative.
Thanks all.
All right. Take care, everyone. Thank you.